Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October 2022 One WILPF call. I'm your host, Mary Beth Gardam from Iowa City, Iowa. Our technical support person is Ellen Thomas from North Carolina. I'm still admitting people. We've got an important presentation tonight, so if you haven't already invited friends to follow along, you might want to take a moment to do that now. You can invite them to join us. I'll put the registration link in the chat, and it's easy to copy and paste it into an email right now, or you can find the WILPF US e-alert that went out on Tuesday and just forward it. Let's see if I can make this work. Yeah, no, that's not it. Hold on a second. Hard to do three things at once, but I'm working on it. Let's see. Okay, here is the registration link, which you can easily invite people to.
I think you need to send it. It's not showing
you
up.
have to hit enter.
Yes, okay. I'm having to find the chat. There we go. There we are. And let me also put in the agenda for tonight, which is pretty direct. We have three wonderful speakers tonight. One of them is our own Cherrill Spencer from the Disarm committee. And we also have Medea Benjamin with us tonight, as a special guest. And finally, we'll have Charlotte Dennett as well. So this will be the last One WILPF call of 2022. Due to a lack of capacity, we're cutting back to quarterly calls in 2023. That means it'll be a little bit more challenging to organize on a national level, especially around our solidarity actions that we do all together. If you or someone you know is willing to help organize and facilitate these calls so we can go back to having them more frequently, please contact me at mbgardam@gmail.com. That's mbgardam@gmail.com. These Zoom calls are sponsored by members of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. They are public calls, and we're video recording, and the video will be posted in just a few days to WILPF's YouTube channel and on our One WILPF call webpage. I believe Ellen is placing the links for those in the chat. WILPF US is a sisterhood, though we welcome male, queer, and trans members too. These national connections to one another keep us strong across the United States. WILPF is the oldest international women's peace organization in the world, founded in 1915 by Jane Addams of Hull House. There are over 30 branches across the United States, and we are one of 50 sections around the world. You can find out more and join us at our website, www.wilpfus.org, and you can join us there too. Please remain muted when you're not speaking to reduce background noise, and the agenda is posted in the chat. Use the Google text pad to add information. If you'd like, under everything that's already posted there, And the link to that is also hopefully in the chat, or I can place it there pretty easily. Let's see.
I just put it there.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl.
So did I.
All right.
And we'll put it again in a few minutes because you don't see the chat if you come in late to a meeting.
Okay, great.
Chat that happened before.
Okay, on our March call, we heard from Mahmoud Fatil, a Crimea Tatar, about Ukraine's historical cataclysmic clashes with Russia, including the kinds of ethnic cleansing attacks and deportations that Russia has always used to intimidate, concentrate power in that part of the world. The Disarm Committee and our partners in the No to NATO coalition and the Peace in Ukraine coalition have also looked at the way that NATO and the US has closed in on Russia over the last decades in what some would call provocative ways. And our WILPF member, Gloria McMillan, has spoken at the Disarm Committee about the international criminal tentacles that oligarchs on both sides employ to profit from a proxy war in Ukraine. There's a lot to keep track of, and our task as WILPF members and peace women is to offer an alternative perspective to that which our mainstream media is spewing. So one that lifts up the failure of efforts to prevent this war and navigate and negotiate a lasting peace. Normalizing war is what the media does, and the politicians and the oligarchs. Our challenge is to wage life and to consistently and loudly point out that peace makes sense on an economic, environmental, and human rights basis. So tonight, our special guests will provide some recommendations for how we can lift up that peaceful alternative, normalize a rational approach to peace, and condemn those who profit from war. We'll hear from our own Cherrill Spencer, co-chair of the WILPF US Disarm and Wars Committee. Charlotte Dennett will provide some perspective on how the recent announcement that OPEC is cutting production will affect the war long term. And our sister and ally, Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, will offer some recommendations her organization is providing, along with a video that she's produced that can help us make the case for peace. Let's start with Medea. Welcome, Medea, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Can we begin with a statement about the actions Code Pink is recommending, and then talk more about the history and context of this conflict, your new book, and the video you brought us? Welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to be on with you. In terms of actions, we are desperately trying to get more of our elected officials to come out for negotiations. And you'd think that that could be an easy task. In fact, there are some groups that are saying you don't even have to call for an end to the weapons transfers. Just make sure there's also a track that is negotiations. And even then, it's been extremely difficult to find members of Congress who are willing to do this. So we feel that it is our job to provide the kind of grassroots momentum that we unfortunately don't have because we don't have a very robust peace movement, let's face it. At this time, you probably have talked about how it became, how the $40 billion tranche of money for Ukraine went down, and the most recent $13+ billion, where not one Democrat voiced opposition to it. But we know that there were 57 Republicans in the House and 11 in the Senate who did. And I think it's important to look at why. There were a number of reasons they gave. Some of them we would be totally against, such as these weapons should be going to fight our real adversary, which is China. Or else they'd say something like, we need to use that money to militarize more our southern border to keep the hordes of immigrants from coming in. But some of them did have a much more rational voice, which said that we have so many domestic needs at home. And they said they were getting pressure from their base. And that's where I think we have failed on the Democrat side. There's not enough pressure on the base for them to be coming out for negotiations. And so that's why we have formed with a number of other groups this coalition called Peace in Ukraine. We would love for WILPF to be more actively involved in that. We call for weeks of actions, and the actions range from contacting our elected officials to going to the media, writing op-eds, letters to the editor, using the social media, all of the tools that we think of. But we're also going back to the very basics. And we tend to be an older crowd on this call. So we remember the days when we used to have house parties to educate people. And we're really going back to that, saying we need to build this movement, and we're not ready for the time that history is calling us. And so we've got to go back to very basic things, having house parties where we discuss the issues, having meetings in our libraries, meetings in our community groups and our faith-based groups. And that's why as Code Pink, we've developed what I think are some very useful tools. One is this book, which is a basic, easy to read primer, 200 pages, War in Ukraine, Making Sense of a Senseless Conflict, and the video that goes with this, which is 20 minutes long. And as soon as I'm done talking, we'll show just a couple of minutes of that for you to get a taste of it and see if it's something that you would like to show in your home, at your library, or wherever you can gather a couple of people together. So that's the part of what we think we can and must do. To go backwards now to a little bit of the history, we actually go through that quite detailed in our book and less detailed in the 20-minute video. But we do think that it's important to do two things. One, be very explicit that we're condemning the Russian invasion, that it's a violation of the UN Charter, that it's a violation of the Kellogg-Briand Act, it's a violation of our basic sense of humanity and morality. On the end, to also say that while we think it was unjustified, we think it was provoked. And that's why we go into detail in talking about the role of NATO in not only surrounding Russia, but NATO becoming this very aggressive military alliance that took part with the United States in the bombing of Kosovo and in the invasion of Afghanistan and the invasion of Libya, joined the US not right away, but later on in its occupation of Iraq. And so seen from the eyes of many people in Russia, it is a very dangerous, aggressive alliance. Now, of course, the invasion of Ukraine has only strengthened that alliance and strengthened militarism in general, not just in Russia and Ukraine, but here in the United States, it's a justification for increasing even greater now that Pentagon budget, and the tranches of money going to Ukraine, which is now over $60 billion, comes separately from that Pentagon budget. One of the things I wanted to talk about was what I hear. I've just on the beginning of this book tour. And what I hear over and over again is you can't talk to Putin. Putin is a maniac. Putin will never keep his word. And I think it's important for us to be able to counter that. One, to say there's nobody else but Putin to talk to, so we've got to talk to him. If indeed he is a maniac, he might very well use nuclear weapons, and so we better sit down to talk to him. That it's irresponsible leadership on the part of President Biden and Anthony Blinken, who's supposed to be our highest diplomat, not to be talking to the Russians. We think that Blinken should be talking to his counterpart Lavrov every single day. We go into the history of the possible negotiations that were taking place at the end of March, beginning of April, where it looked positive that the plan that was put forth by Russia was looked on by Zelensky as a good starting point, and they were making headway. And Zelensky at that point was even saying, we understand that while we want to join NATO, we have to defer that dream, and Ukraine will have to be a neutral country. But when the US and the UK really squashed those talks, the positions began to harden even more. When people say you can't talk to Russia, I also think it's important to give a couple of examples where negotiations have taken place, some of them more successful than others, but with some success. For example, getting many, many tons of grain out of the country to countries in Africa and the Middle East that are so desperate for that grain, the human corridor that was formed to get civilians out of Mariupol when that was under siege, the way that the International Atomic Energy Association was able to get into the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, and then prison swaps, which people don't hear about, but have been taking place on a regular basis. So that from my count, there have been 16 of them, some of them with hundreds of people on each side. And just imagine how difficult it is logistically and the level of trust that has to be built to be able to make those prison swaps happen. So those are some of the reasons I think we must say that you can and must and have no other choice but to negotiate with Putin. Now, the position of the United States right now is to say, we won't negotiate, and this is up to the Ukrainians. But really, the U.S. is hiding behind that position when Ukraine and Russia must, of course, negotiate, but there also has to be negotiations between the U.S. and Russia. For example, one of the compromises that will come out of negotiations is a lifting of some of the sanctions. Well, Ukraine can't do that. It is the United States that has to do that. I think there is a rising voices now that we can point to on different parts of the political and other sectoral spectrums that are coming out with more rational positions of the need for negotiations. Most recently, you might have heard of the former Chief of Staff, General Mike Mullen, that has said the only way this is going to end is at the negotiating table. The Pope has certainly had good positions, but that has not trickled down to the churches. And I think it's one of the areas where we in this movement can reach out to different faith-based communities to get them to come out in favor of negotiations. We also have somebody we quote very reluctantly in our video, which is Henry Kissinger, saying that we are now in a fight that can lead to World War III, and it's one for a good part of our own making. And we have some decent, rare editorials coming out in some papers, like the New York Times, that said, where is this all leading? And we have had no direction from the people in power in this country about what they think the end game of this is now, and how unrealistic, said the New York Times editorial board, it is to think that Ukraine can ever take back every inch of Donbass and Crimea as well, and that all we would have to do is keep throwing weapons in. So there are some other places that we can look to quote. But one thing I just wanted to bring up, as I think is so dangerous, is that I feel it's the extreme right, both in this country and other places, that are taking advantage of the opposition that is growing to this war, from the effects that it's having on inflation. The number one issue for people in this country is always the economy. We see what's happening in Europe, and when the winter sets in, how difficult it's going to be for people to pay for these high energy prices. And we're already seeing in Europe protests against inflation that bring up the issue of Ukraine, organized by the extreme right. and blaming it on the center or left governments that are perpetuating this war. Here in the US, we see former President Trump coming out and saying that were he in power, this war wouldn't have happened because he would have talked to Putin. And that might actually be correct. And many people believe that. He is also joining up with people in the more extreme right of the party, because I don't even know what these terms mean anymore, but the mainstream of the Republican Party, like Mitch McConnell, is calling for more and more weapons, while people more to the right are saying we have to reevaluate this. So I think the Democratic Party is going to take a beating, if not in this election, in the upcoming one. Indeed, if the war continues on, and there is a good chance that it will continue on if we don't organize enough. So I just want to leave there by recognizing that this is the anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I know you're going to talk more with your brilliant people here that are going to talk about nuclear weapons, and WILPF has such an amazing history working on those nuclear weapons. But I think that the lesson we must take from the Cuban Missile Crisis is John F. Kennedy's willingness to talk to Khrushchev, and not only to demand that those weapons be removed from Cuba, but also the little known compromise that the US was going to take its missiles from Turkey. And what JFK said at the time is, never make a nuclear power choose between a humiliating defeat and a nuclear war. And that's exactly what we're doing now in the case of pushing Putin into a corner. So we all know the dangers of nuclear war. Unfortunately, the younger generation doesn't resonate when we talk to them about nuclear war. They don't have the history that many of us have. And so what I've been talking to them more about is the climate catastrophe, how this is unleashing a new round of dirty energy, both fracking and more oil production because of the sanctions on Russia, and the use of more coal, and the stopping the decommissioning of dangerous nuclear power plants, and how the money that we, meaning the US and the West, are pouring into this war in Ukraine, now collectively over $100 billion, is money that could and should be used to deal with the climate crisis. And at the UN, we saw when the General Assembly was meeting, heads of states of small island nations that are about to go under, saying, you promised us a decade ago $100 billion for the Global Climate Fund. So far, after 10 years, there's only been $10 billion put in there. And meantime, you've put the entire promise of $100 billion into a war in Ukraine. Something is wrong here. So let me stop there and just say that we have a lot of work to do, and I'm delighted to be working with WILPF on this. And if we can now just show a piece of the video, and Mary Beth, whenever you want to stop it is fine with me, because you're the one keeping the time here. But thank you all for giving me the time to be with you today.
Okay, let's look at that video. Can you get it up here? Hold on just a second. Let me share screen, share sound, go here and here.
Let's talk about the heartbreaking war in Ukraine and what we could do to try to end it. Every day the war rages on, civilians and soldiers are being killed. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee and seek asylum in foreign lands. Schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, and infrastructure have been reduced to rubble. We wrote this book to try to help people make sense of a war that should never have happened, a war that has raged on for months and might well rage on for years, a war that could lead to a nuclear confrontation, a war that must be stopped. We know that people have very different opinions about this conflict, and we hope that our book and this talk will foster respectful dialogue. We have not tried to justify or excuse Russia's invasion of Ukraine because we do not think it is justifiable or excusable. We hope we can help you understand the context, the background, and the actions of all the parties that led to this crisis. As U.S. citizens, we have very little hope of influencing the Russian government, but we should be able to influence our own government, which is why it's so important to look at the role the United States has played in fomenting the conflict. Let's look at two elements of U.S. involvement that we highlight in our book: NATO expansion and the events of 2014. Western leaders call NATO a defensive military alliance, but NATO was formed to defend Western Europe from invasion by the Soviet Union. That mission was accomplished when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991. NATO should have been dissolved at the end of the Cold War, along with the Warsaw Pact, which was NATO's counterpart in the Eastern Bloc. Instead, NATO reinvented itself to justify its continued existence. It expanded all the way to Russia's borders, despite many promises that it would not do so, and ignoring warnings from experienced U.S. and Western diplomats that this would lead to a predictable yet entirely avoidable crisis with Russia, as in fact it has. You can see the map showing the various waves of expansion in which NATO incorporated former Soviet republics and Russia's European neighbors. In 2018, the antagonism reached new heights when NATO, under U.S. pressure, publicly promised membership to the former Soviet republics of Ukraine and Georgia. While no definite date was set, NATO began supplying increased levels of military aid and training to Ukraine, including Ukraine in military exercises. So Russia certainly had legitimate concerns about Ukraine's involvement in an ever-expanding military alliance that was encircling Russia with powerful military forces and had already unleashed aggressive wars and occupations in Kosovo in 1999, Afghanistan in 2001, and Libya and Syria in 2011. The other event that served to set the stage for the Russian invasion in 2022 was the coup in Ukraine in 2014. The 2014 upheavals began with massive peaceful protests against the corrupt pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych. Unfortunately, though, these protests turned violent and were co-opted by neo-Nazi groups that refused to go along with an internationally negotiated plan for a political transition, and instead they spearheaded a coup. The extent of U.S. support and involvement in this coup is still shrouded in secrecy, as are previous U.S.-backed coups in Iran, Chile, and many other countries. But a leaked audio tape of Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt exposed their roles as coup managers as they handpicked what positions each of their Ukrainian collaborators would assume in the post-coup government. Although the original peaceful protests in Ukraine were about wanting to join the European Union, Nuland dismissed the European Union's more popular choice for Prime Minister, Vitaly Klitschko, with her infamous "F the EU" remark. According to a Gallup poll conducted in April 2014, nearly 50% of Ukrainians rejected the legitimacy of the post-coup government. This led to rebellions in parts of Ukraine that were ethnically and culturally close to Russia. in Crimea, a peninsula on the Black Sea with a mostly Russian-speaking population that was part of Russia from 1783 until 1954, as well as in the eastern provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk. In Odessa, 42 anti-coup protesters were burned to death by a mob on May 2, 2014. The new government in Ukraine was rejected by the parliament in Crimea, and a referendum to rejoin Russia passed overwhelmingly and was accepted by Russia but not recognized by other countries. The provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk also passed referendums declaring themselves independent from Ukraine, leading to a civil war that killed an estimated 14,000 people. Many Ukrainian military units based in this region defected to the self-declared People's Republics or refused to fight their own people, so the Ukrainian government formed new National Guard units to fight the separatists. These included units like the Azov Battalion, recruited from the same neo-Nazi groups that took up arms to spearhead the coup in Kiev in February 2014. The worst fighting of the Civil War ended in February 2015 with the signing of the Minsk II Accord. This was drafted by France, Germany, and Russia, and agreed to by Ukraine and the self-declared republics. It set up a ceasefire and a buffer zone between the warring parties and was monitored by 1,300 monitors and staff from the OSCE, which is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. While the ceasefire largely held from 2015 to 2022, the Ukrainian government failed to implement the political aspects of the Minsk II agreement. It had agreed to grant Donetsk and Luhansk a new autonomous status, but each time the Ukrainian government tried to move forward on this, extreme right-wing forces re-exerted their power and insisted that Ukraine must instead keep fighting to recover its lost territories. NATO and the U.S. also bear responsibility for the failure of Minsk II. Despite officially claiming to support the agreement, NATO and the U.S., under both Trump and Biden, kept building up Ukraine's military, encouraging the Ukrainian government to believe it could eventually recover Donbass and Crimea by force, and that the U.S. and NATO would support that.
Okay. Well, I think you can see that this is a very complex situation with lots of players. I've heard it argued that if the United States was being surrounded by bases set up by Russia, we would not, be sanguine about it. We would be very worried. And so it's easy to see how Russia feels. And I was hoping that Gloria McMillan would be on tonight, but I haven't seen her yet. She had a report about a meeting she attended that was part of the, let me see where it is. It was the CSIS plenary on free and prosperous Ukraine, during which Odile Renaud-Basso, the chair of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which has been investing in information tech in Ukraine and other sectors, confronted Daniel Rundin, a VP in CSIS, who represents US foundations and investors going into Ukraine. Rundin is very anxious for Ukraine to join the EU, and Ms. Renaud-Basso said much work needs to be done. Once in the EU, would have to do everything to institute controls and regulations on graft and theft of state resources and make huge investments that are not stolen to make Ukraine at least something like Poland. They don't want Ukraine in the EU because that would open up EU countries to influences coming out of Ukraine more than at present because of open borders and less barriers to Ukrainian business dealings across the EU. So even though ostensibly this is all about Ukraine wanting to join the EU and the EU wanting them there, there's a lot of hesitation on the part of the EU about admitting them. And even Mr. Runde, who was in favor of this, admitted that it could easily be 15, 20, 25 years until I have all the regulations in place that would permit it. So, it really kind of doesn't make much sense. When you've been talking to the Republican legislators or the Democratic Congress people, Medea, have you seen any cracks that we could get into? What are the states that would offer the most successful approach, or at least some hospitality for our thinking?
Well, I was just in Congress today, and I've been going there whenever I have a chance. Rob and Lloyd, you might be interested. Actually, it wasn't Vermont. We were in Maine today, meeting with some of the Congress people there. There is just so much influence in Congress of the military. These days, you have to be escorted into the building. The guy who came out to get us was a, quote, fellow from the Defense Department, who was embedded in the office of this Congressman Golden. When we met with the person that deals with Ukraine, he was a reservist in the military, and the congressman himself fought in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they told us right from the beginning, we'll be honest with you, the congressman is calling for more weapons to go to Ukraine. And so we had to take the tact of saying, well, we totally disagree with you, but couldn't at least you be calling for negotiations as well? During the Vietnam War, there were peace talks going on for years while the fighting was going on. And he said, well, we doubt the congressman would go for that, but, we can talk to him about it. That's just one example to show what we're up against. And you would think in the progressive caucus, it would be a lot easier. But it's hard there as well. There are a couple of dozen Congress people who are going to be coming out calling for negotiations. And I think it's because they have been pressured by their base. The opening we will have is after the election. The Democrats don't want to challenge a Democratic president, especially at election time. And so I think as soon as the November elections are over, then we can go into full swing of putting pressure on them and have hopes that we'd be able to get a lot more of them to join us in recognizing the danger of a nuclear war and trying to find ways to avert that by pushing for peace talks.
If anyone else has questions for Medea, please put them in the chat in caps so we can see them easily. I think it's particularly tricky to be for peace, but not for Russia. It would be great if we were able to come up with some slogan that identified this little niche that we're in, where we're for peace, not necessarily for Russia.
Well, I think let's be careful, because we are for Russia when it comes to the Russian people, just like we are for people around the world who all of us are the victims of these wars, except for the big weapons companies and the energy companies that profit from this. And while the sanctions on Russia have not really kicked in enough to affect the economy of the Russian people yet, it will very soon. And we also know that Russian soldiers, a lot of them have been dying, and now they're pulling up 300,000 more. And there's a lot of opposition inside Russia. And I know that you all have been supporting the women in Russia who are calling for an end to this war. And it's important to show our solidarity with those Russians who are protesting, those Russians who are refusing to fight, and those Russians who have fled the country because they are totally opposed to this war.
Nancy Price says we'll have to be organized and prepared to oppose the NDAA and military budget for 2024. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And Virginia, in terms of your question, I really don't know the answer to that. Perhaps, and I should look into that more. I think it has been more part of Biden's. Biden has been anti-Russia for a long time. When he was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he was very anti-Russia, and this was before the whole Hunter Biden scandal. So I think he has a history of that. You know, the Republicans tend to be more anti-China, the Democrats more anti-Russia, and that was exacerbated by this Russiagate scandal where they tried to convince the American public that Hillary Clinton lost because of Russia's interference in our elections, and that's why Trump won. So there was already a lot of anti-Russia sentiment. And then, you know, Biden is very tight with the military and the neocons, and he kept people like Victoria Nuland in important positions of power. And he brought in Secretary Austin as the Secretary of Defense, who came to us straight from the board of Raytheon. So Biden is a hawk in many ways. And unfortunately, both parties are. So, yeah. And then somebody wrote about the explosion of Nord Stream 1 pipeline have a wider impact on the expansion of war. Yes, I can't imagine who would have done that except the US and Western powers, because especially the US, because the US has so much to gain from blowing up that pipeline. The US has been opposed to the dependency that Western Europe has had on energy, and you have people who are going to speak after me who are much more expert on this issue. But I do think that the explosion is a way to say once and for all, you're not going to get your energy from Russia. There's not going to be any backroom deals in this to stave off the energy crisis that's affecting Western Europe. By going back into some kind of realignment with Russia, because we're going to make sure this pipeline is blown up. And Nancy, I see, has at the time before Yanukovych was overthrown, the EU was then proposing EU membership, but the need before then was structural adjustments, and there was resistance to that. Exactly, Nancy, and you are a great expert on this, but I think that was one of the reasons why Yanukovych was hesitant to sign the agreement with the EU, especially because the agreement was also opening up Ukraine to the Western companies, but not having the same reciprocity for Ukrainian companies to have the same access into the other European markets. And then finally, I think we have Robin Lloyd saying we're going to be holding a rally in front of Representative Peter Welch's office tomorrow. Could you send us the link to Jayapal's letter for your negotiations? Yes, it seems I got myself in trouble by saying on Democracy Now! That there was this letter, and it's supposed to be a secretive letter until it is sent out, but I will send that to you, Robin.
Okay, great. Well, Medea, thank you very much for being with us tonight. We so appreciate the work that you're doing every day in Washington and organizing around the country. I know that our members will take this video to heart and your book and use it to help people, invite people to learn what's really happening in Ukraine. There's so much interest. It should be a popular tool. And if we can host watch parties in our homes or just pass along the link to the video through email. Either way, let's help to get the word out and encourage people to learn what's really behind this war.
Thank you so much for giving me the time. And if anybody wants to invite me to your community to give talks, that is great too. And I just love the work and appreciate so much that what WILPF is doing in showing all the different sides in this, but ultimately doing what WILPF has done for the time it started, which is try to find a way to peace. So thank you very much, Mary Beth and everyone else.
Mary Beth, can I just answer the question about Hunter Biden, or wait until I come on later? I have an answer to that.
Well, do you want to do it now, or do you want to do it when you...
It seemed like people were really interested. I just want to say, Medea, you might be interested in this. Yeah, there's information that under the Obama administration, there was great interest in developing the oil and natural gas resources in the eastern regions, which have been the subject of all this conflict. And that's because Ukraine has the second highest oil and natural gas reserves in Europe, and the richest ones are in the eastern region. And so as Vice President, Biden went over there and encouraged U.S. investment in that region. And I'm sorry to say that the largest energy company in Ukraine was going to be the one that spearheaded the investment. And guess what its name was? Burisma.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm going to give more on the energy angle to this whole thing later on. Hi, Medea. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Charlotte. We'll get back
Great,
to you.
thanks for that info, Charlotte. I'd love to reconnect with you and learn more. Thank you.
Okay, our WILPF Disarm and Wars Committee has their own list of recommended actions, and co-chair Cherrill Spencer, please feel free to share the screen and tell us what your committee is recommending in the way of actions for us.
Thank you very much, Medea. And Ellen is going to share the screen for me. My very old laptop often refuses to do that very well, but I will start speaking. Medea has touched on very many aspects of this war. And so our Disarm Committee is trying to tackle it on from those various angles. What can we, as members of the public, be doing to, as she said, pressure our representatives for them to pressure the president to help seek negotiations. And so one of the things that is available, and this is all in the text pad that's in the Google Doc, and I'm hoping that Ellen is trying to bring the text up from my Word document. Here we go. So there is actually you need to back up from there. There is a sample letter that actually Code Pink helped to put together that was written some time ago about not sending more weapons to Ukraine. And you could, the link to that particular sample letter is in the Google Doc, and you can download it yourself and then modify it, because it needs to be modified. It's a bit out of date, but it's specifically to your representative. And you can say in that letter how disappointed you are that every single Democrat, if your representative is a Democrat, you can bet they voted for more and more money and weapons to be sent to Ukraine. So we need to tell them how disappointed we are in that. Even Barbara Lee in Oakland, who has a bill to reduce the NDAA by $100 billion. Okay, good for her. Nevertheless, has made she voted for all these extra $13.7 billion and so on. So I don't know, Ellen, if you can make that particular webinar that you see on the screen is going to be talked about later in this One WILPF call. So if you could just bring it up higher up. Anyway, I'll keep going.
Ellen, if you stop screen sharing, I will get it to the right place and screen and share it. But this is not what Cherrill needs to talk about or point towards.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll stop.
Okay, so we're a member of this coalition called Peace in Ukraine. I think there's probably 100 different peace groups in it, and we've been meeting since March, having discussions as to what our particular take is on this, what is it that we're asking the public to do, and by a lot of discussions and analysis, we've come up with our what it is we believe. So, and what we want the public to do. So if you go to the Google Doc, you will see a website there that's full of what we call talking points, statements, petitions, more sample letters, some provided by the other members of the coalition. So that is a very useful website to go and pick up things that have already been written, and to help you argue with your brother-in-law who thinks more weapons should be sent to Ukraine. So another thing I would like you all to do is actually to watch a very recent webinar that the Arms Control Association held with some very knowledgeable experts who know a lot about what exactly are the nuclear weapons that Russia has, what kinds of weapons have they got, what would they likely be to use if they chose to use one in the Ukraine, and then what do they think the likelihood is that that's going to happen, and then Rose Gottmiller, one of the speakers, who's also here at Stanford University near where I live, she used to work in NATO, and she gave an analysis of what NATO's doing and not doing, and how they are seeing things. They are taking excuse me, they're looking at nuclear weapons as a deterrent, which of course we don't particularly agree with. We believe that if there were no nuclear weapons, we wouldn't be in this pickle. So WILPF and our allies are working towards abolition of nuclear weapons. So, but nevertheless, it's always useful to listen to these experts, and that's the recording on a YouTube there that I have given you a link to. So then just today, the president of Peace Action, which is an enormous peace organization, again, one of our allies in the peace in Ukraine, has written an article in Common Dreams, and I've given you the link there to the Common Dreams article. And he is urging us all to join these picket lines that are going to happen tomorrow. And we have been asking our WILPF branches to do this, excuse me. And so I give you there the link to a website where you can find the 50 or so picket lines that have been set up, will happen tomorrow, Friday, the 14th of October, all over the United States. I will be leading one here at my WILPF branch in Palo Alto, outside our representative's office. The point is to tell your representatives that nuclear weapons are no good, that they are dangerous, even if we don't use them, and various things that should happen to reduce this threat of accidental nuclear setting off, that ICBMs are not any use anymore. In fact, they are a really dangerous nuisance for us to own any. And so I'm urging all the people on this webinar, this meeting today, to go to that website, find a picket line near you. There, I swear they'll be within 20 miles of your home, because they're in many cities where we have branches. And so please get out tomorrow, talk to your, address in some way your congressional representatives. There is, in the same website, there are handouts, the demands are written out, so you can just hand them into the staff of your congressional rep, and at the same time say, press for negotiations over this awful war in Ukraine. So these are just a few of the things that we've been asking our members in Disarm to do. Now I'm asking other WILPFers to do that. And so at the very bottom of that section of the Google Doc, I have given you the address of Ellen Thomas and I. We are co-chairs of our Disarm End Wars Committee, because we welcome other people to join our committee. What I've talked about today is just a few of our campaigns. We have other campaigns going on that need more people to work on them. We are working against killer robots, autonomous weapons that can walk around, so to speak, and kill people without much command from anybody. And we're working on reducing the military budget. We're working on the effects of the military on climate change. We do that in cooperation with Nancy's group, Earth Democracy. So we have lots of things you can do. You can do it from the comfort of your home. And so we request that you look at all these websites and do something, especially tomorrow. We're getting the major media to look at, trying to get them to come out. We're using the same signs. So we've got a branding going on. So anybody, trying to see what's going on will see that this is a coalition of the Diffused Nuclear War Coalition is equally big to the peace in Ukraine, many of the same organizations. I see a lot of people at these planning meetings. It's always nice to see other people from the rest of the peace movement. We complain about the peace movement, but there is a peace movement. There are a lot of people doing work in their local communities to work on against nuclear weapons, to work to get something to happen around the Ukraine-Russia war. So I appreciate this opportunity. I thank you very much. And please try to save the Google Doc, and I will also put some of the links directly in the chat, because I know some of you find it easier to actually save the chat. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Cherrill, and thanks to our hardworking Disarm committee members who meet twice a month.
Could I
Sunday.
speak before we go? Because I got the time wrong, but you wanted me to give a little short summary.
Can you just wait just a second, Gloria?
Sure. Okay.
The Disarm Committee meets twice a month on Sunday evening to strategize and plan together actions that support peace. Finally, we have former journalist based in Lebanon, Charlotte Dennett. She has been a keen observer of oil and its geopolitical importance and its underlying economic power to disrupt and topple democratic governments using espionage and corruption. Her father was the first US master spy in the Middle East, doing counterintelligence for the OSS and the Central Intelligence Group, later the CIA. Charlotte wrote about his efforts to win a pipeline in the US and his murder in her book, Follow the Pipelines, Uncovering the Mystery of a Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics of the Great Game for Oil. Charlotte, OPEC recently announced its intentions to halt production of oil, which will affect every global economy in the world. What's behind this, do you think, and how will it affect the outcome of the war in Ukraine? And then Gloria, as soon as Charlotte is finished, we'll get back to you, I promise.
Okay. Thank you.
Charlotte, are you on mute?
How much time do I have? It's not clear to me. This is going to be a shorter presentation, right, Mary Beth?
Yeah, like 5 minutes.
5 minutes. I'd much rather talk about the pipeline explosion because that's so clear. But at any rate, how is it going to affect flows?
Please talk about anything you think is important for us to know. You decide.
Well, okay. I just want to read one little excerpt from the New York Times on that OPEC agreement. It's viewed as an escalation and a direct blow to the Biden administration. Yes, that's obvious. At a time when the global economy is at risk of recession and energy politics has emerged as a key component in the conflict in Ukraine. What I argue in my writings, and I've got a lot of the links there, and you can also go to my website, followthepipelines.com. You'll see them all there. I believe it's not just a key component. I think it's at the heart of the whole thing. I have predicted in my writings that the war in Ukraine could become the mother of all energy wars. And I say all energy wars because all the wars in the Middle East have been energy wars. And it's all documented in my book. And then lo and behold, now Europe's involved. So if you just look at what happened to the Nord Stream 2 pipelines and you look at the whole history of what happened there, the explosion was also seen as an escalation. And you're seeing further and further escalations going on. So we are in a very dangerous situation. Most people agree that the United States had to be the main it had benefited cui bono from the explosion. Why? Because it had tried to prevent these pipelines, particularly not Nord Stream 2, for even going into effect. For years, they tried to prevent it. Why? Because it supplies a great deal of energy to Europe, Russian energy to Europe. And the US has been engaged in a process of trying to weaken not only Russia, but to lessen Europe's reliance on Russian energy. So to my mind, this is the great game on steroids. You've got two giant petropowers that are fighting each other now, nuclear armed. They used to use proxies in the endless wars. Now it's pretty direct. And when Biden said that we're going to stay here, we're going to be fighting this for as long as it takes, what did he mean by that? A, as long as it takes to weaken Russia, and B, to make sure, in my humble opinion, but it never gets discussed, is to get a hold of those oil and natural gas resources in eastern Ukraine. So I had mentioned that there's a report that the Obama administration was eyeing those resources and had Vice President Biden champion it, and putting Hunter on the board of Burisma was one way of doing it, because that's not going to come out. Nor have you ever heard about Eastern Ukraine, what its real significance is. And by the way, Crimea, if you look, I've got a map in my book that shows Crimea is surrounded by the Baltic Sea. Well, what about the Baltic Sea? It's loaded with oil and natural gas. So what's been going on ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union is an effort by the West and NATO countries to get the former Soviet republics investing in their natural resources involving US companies. And so that I think is an underlying reason for this continued encroachment, because if you're going to protect the oil, you need the military. One of the things I learned from my father's declassified papers way back in '43, he was saying, before he was posted to Lebanon, he said, we must protect the oil at all costs. And at that point, it was the oil of Saudi Arabia, because it was going to be key to refinancing the Marshall Plan. It's that meme. If you follow, you can follow it throughout the next 70 years. And it's the same thing. Oil is no good if it's in the ground. It has to be distributed by pipelines to get to its markets, mostly pipelines. And in order to do that, you're going to go through some territory where you're not sure you can protect it, hence the military. So that's what my book, Follow the Pipelines, does with lots of maps and charts. It shows you the total combination of the imperial thrust, if I may say, to protect the pipelines. No bank will support a pipeline scheme if there's instability. So that's another aspect of the involvement of the big banks. I heard, if you heard Democracy Now! Today, there was a new angle to it all, which we should all look at, where a Ukrainian woman is saying, well, you're thinking about the US being imperialist. I look at, my research has shown that the Russians are imperialists and that Putin has been trying to take advantage of Europe's weakness, is dependency on Russian oil and gas. And so who knows? I mean, I think it goes both ways.
Charlotte, can you put the website into the chat that you talked about, your website, so
Yeah.
people can find
Okay,
it?
so I guess
Okay.
that about does it. If you go onto my website and it's followthepipelines.com. It's pretty simple. I'll write it in.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Thank you for being with us to give us your spin on this. It's always worth hearing what you're thinking about and clarifying our own thoughts. So thank you.
But if I could just say that the one reason why you don't hear it, why it's not on the media, oil is still the major commodity of the military. The military is the largest consumer of oil. And if they don't have it, they lose wars like Hitler did. That's why it's a national security issue and you don't hear it in the press.
So is Russia withholding, is OPEC withholding new reserves going to hurt the United States or Russia?
No, it will hurt the United States. Russia will, by increased oil prices, Russia will continue to, have its wars.
They'll have more money to put into their
Yes, it will.
war
And
chest.
Putin is very crafty. He's ex-KGB. He's very crafty in the great game. He's already reaching out to Turkey now and looking at new pipeline routes to supply Russian natural gas to Europe via Turkey. So he's very clever. I think the Americans have been caught flat-footed on this whole thing.
Okay, we're gonna give folks a chance to ask questions of Charlotte and Cherrill in just a minute, but first I wanted to introduce Gloria McMillan. Gloria, you weren't here, so I did a probably insufficient job of trying to report on your attendance at that meeting, but perhaps you could fill us in.
Okay,
Quickly.
first of all, I'd like to paste in some of the things that I know about gas in Russia and in Ukraine. And one of them is this Dmitro Firtash guy who owns Ros Ukray Energo. And this is a Swiss venture company, and Dmitro Firtash is its owner. And I got it, I only sent it to Cherrill, so I have to repaste it there. I think that's it. Yeah. There are equivalent people in both Russia and in Ukraine controlling these little, for instance, there's the gas princess, Yulia Tymoshenko, who was called that because she siphoned off so much money from gas terminals in Ukraine and rose to prominence earlier than the 2010s. I think she was big around maybe 2010, 2011. Then she got imprisoned briefly by another cartel that was running the country at that time. It's various cartels running Ukraine. And these different oligarchs that have control of like Burisma, for instance, I think Burisma is owned by Ihor Kolomaisky, but he had a front man running Burisma who he owned. And I forget his name, Mikhail Michenko or something. I can't remember the name. I'd have to go look it up. But in Ukraine, you don't have to own a company. You just need to own the man who owns the company or the woman who owns the company. And so some of these people controlling the pipelines have been in the past with the Yanukovych government, which was favoring Russia. Some of these loud Ukrainian defending gas people and oligarchs of oil were with the Eastern faction, and they were with Yanukovych. So you can see that this one, I don't know where he is. I have him in here somewhere in my notes here. Dmitro Firtash, where is it? Ross Energo, I think he's the one that owns that. Yeah.
The names are going to be less important than the patterns.
Oh, here it is,
and-
Dmitro Firtash. Well, these factions are quite important though, because they control the country. There's only a few people and they do. And maybe it's less important at your level right now to know it's Dmitro Firtash, but I think Charlotte should know Dmitro Firtash. You
Spell
know
his name, please.
it's right there in the chat. DMYTRO FIRTASH.
Gloria, you need to hit enter in order for us to be able to see it.
Oh, I did. It's blue on my screen.
Yeah, on your screen, but not on
Yeah,
ours.
it's entered.
I can see it.
It's higher up in the
Yeah, you have
paragraphs.
to go back.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
there because when
Okay.
it's blue, it means it's already been entered. Okay, so previously in Ukraine, they had ties with, you remember the Druzhba pipeline? They had ties all the way into Russia, these oligarchs. And Gazprom, they were connected. It isn't like Ukrainian oligarchs over here, Russians over here. There are a lot of switching of allegiances because of, and it's always over money and gas or money and steel or money and ports or whatever the going MacGuffin is that they're making their money on. Because one thing they make their money on is energy, but they make their money on fertilizer, on rare earth minerals, because Donbass is a huge center of rare earth mineral mining. So I think that it's important just to know that Gazprom is a real hub, and that any oligarchs in Ukraine at one time or another were connected with Gazprom in Russia. And if you don't know who that is, best to know. I'm sure Charlotte knows who Gazprom is and who some of the officers of Gazprom are or have been. And these are the ways that I don't know, in terms of, I'm not in the inside on the energy thing to know who did the bombing of the pipeline. And I guess that may be a grab, but the Nord Stream 2 was very important to Germany, and having it sabotaged by the West was very much disruptive of the whole European economy. And whether or not we agree with the invasion, and I don't agree with any invasion, but we had encircled Russia. That doesn't get mentioned enough, because we have encircled Russia with bases, US has, all around. And they're starting to punch back, punch out in various ways. So it isn't going to get prettier until we get to the negotiating table. And just disguising that it isn't about these monetary things and trying to pretty up Zelensky's corrupt backers and everything isn't going to be the solution. Okay, that's all.
Okay, thank you. So if anyone has questions for Charlotte or Cherrill or Gloria, you please put them in the chat. We'll have a short time for that, because we still have announcements to get to. But if you have questions, I thought that the recommendations that Charlotte was making were wonderful. That Cherrill was making were wonderful, especially the one about finding a protest tomorrow. Let's get on that. Okay, Nancy Price, doesn't Ukraine also have a pipeline from Russia through Ukraine and to the West?
From Russia.
That would be a question for Charlotte, probably.
All right, what is it from, have a pipeline from Russia through,
Through
there
Ukraine.
there actually, I don't think so, but I think it was planned, unless I'm wrong. I stumbled on this great report, 2000, by the Rand Corporation. And it was, let's see, what was it called? Hold on, I've got the name of it. Ukraine and the Caspian, an opportunity for the US. See, you got to look at this whole region geopolitically, not just Ukraine. And back in the early 1990s, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, everybody was looking at the Caspian Sea. You know, the Caspian Sea is borders Iran and Russia, and it's to the east of Ukraine. But there was a lot of oil and gas, and they were trying to figure out how to get that oil and gas out of the Ukraine, but to bypass Russia. These are all bypassing games, you know. The Russians want to bypass NATO, and NATO wants to bypass Russia with all their pipelines. And so one of the schemes, and you can read about it in this 2000 Rand Corporation report, is one of the routes that they were thinking was to run the pipeline actually from the Caspian Sea under the Baltic Sea through Ukraine. So that's a pipeline. That doesn't really answer your question, though. Ukraine have a pipeline from Russia. Another thing is that Russian pipelines do run through Ukraine. You're right. This is the old Russian pipeline system. And this has been a dicey thing too, because the Ukrainians benefit from the transit fees. And at the same time, Russia has these contracts for distributing its natural gas and oil through Ukraine. But recently, you know, with the escalation of the war, for one thing, Russia is no longer feeding its natural gas to Poland or to Bulgaria, and they get some of their natural gas through these pipelines that run through Ukraine. And by the way, if you look again on followthepipelines.com, you'll see the maps. It'll all make sense once you see the maps and you see all the crisscrossing pipelines. It's clear to you.
Okay, I think that's the only question that we have, because you all did such a great job of presenting. So let's move on. We have important announcements from WILPF US and our national issue committees. There are some important dates and events coming up that you'll want to know about. First announcement is from Dee Murphy. She's chair of the new issue committee, Domestic Prisoners of War. Dee, Ellen can give you screen sharing ability, and tell us what your committee's been working on.
Hi, apologies for not coming on camera at present. I've been running errands all day and I'm just now catching up with everything. But I did want to announce to everyone that on Friday, October 21st, 2022, we will have an introduction to DPOW's seminar or presentation. And we will begin, we're going to go segment by segment. We're looking at the different impacts on the different strata of society in the different communities and the cost of domestic violence to all of us. So if you are interested in attending, I have a little flyer that I designed, and we will be also, I missed the e-alert, but we will be sending the information to the various branch members and to the issue committee chair so that you can, we're still working on this, but this will be the flyer that we're sending out with the link. And I'll also put the link in a chat if anyone wants to save it. Friday.
Can you make it bigger, Dee?
Can I make it bigger? Sure.
It's hard to read.
Nope, that didn't work. So I'll have to, I've still got it in paint here.
Okay.
But we'll
Can you
send
give
out the
us-
flyer where everyone can see it.
Give
And
us,
I'll
can you
ask
give us
the,
the time
designer-
right now?
I'm sorry?
Can you give us the time on the 21st?
Yes, it is 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central. And
Okay.
I will put, like I said, the Zoom link in the chat here.
Right. Yeah, this is a very new issue committee, and they're anxious to tell us all about the work that they've cut out for themselves.
Right, and so we've kind of broken into areas of interest at present. And the more members join, we'll also pursue their areas of interest. We have members researching domestic violence in the Lavender community, the GLBTQ community, the disabled people who have their caretakers who are experiencing challenges, and the Black community. And we're also going to take a look at how much does it cost society and people who aren't contributing to society through the societal ill. So please join us if you have questions, comments, suggestions, input. We're very receptive to that, and there will be a discussion period after our presentation.
Great. Dee, go ahead and put your email in the chat in case people want to get in touch with you.
Okay, you can email me at my personal email address, which will be the first one, or at nomoredpals@gmail.com.
Great. Thank you very
Also,
much.
as the new international advisor, we are coordinating. Oh, thank you very much, Mary. We're coordinating a gathering this Friday, tomorrow night, where we are, and I can look for the link and put that in the chat in a moment. But we're basically going to be spending about 4 or 5 hours watching some of the international webinars from the African Feminist Task Force, for instance, and what they're doing on the environment around the world. And there's some really powerful work being done, some amazing presentations. So if anyone is interested in what's happening with international, please send me an email, or you can just join at the link that I put here in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Or not a couple of minutes, but a few seconds.
All right, thanks, Dee.
you're
That sounds like a subject that will appeal to a lot of people inside WILPF and in the public. So next up is George Friday, who has an announcement about the No to NATO group.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here with you. And I will, Mary Beth, keep to my 3 minutes because I believe in that. I will also share the screen so that instead of looking at me, you can see this great flyer that one of our members from the Black Liberation Caucus put together. I don't have to emphasize the importance of challenging NATO. When Medea spoke tonight, she made it really clear that as US citizens, we can't do much about in Ukraine, we can't do much in Russia, but we can certainly press our own countries. Next Tuesday at 11 o'clock Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern, we will have this meeting it's a webinar in meeting form, No to NATO. We will hear from these great speakers. Tamara is from US, is from Canada, WILPF. Ulla is from Finland. She's very well known there. Christine is one of the co-founders from No to NATO. Agneta Norberg is from Sweden, and our own Ann Wright, who's a WILPF US member. You can register here. I will demonstrate. Ta-da, now it's a registration. You click on it, now there you are to register. So I put the link in the chat. So let me hit enter. So everyone has that link in the chat. And one of the most chilling things about NATO from the research we've done in our working group, which started with Disarm, but is now a no NATO working group within Disarm that planned this, Nancy's part of that, Gloria, other folks. I don't know if there's other folks on the call tonight. If I missed you, my apologies. But one of the most chilling things from the research that I read is that NATO by 2030 wants full spectrum dominance. You know, air, water, land, sea, everything. And you've heard tonight plenty of reasons why we should challenge NATO. So I don't need to add to that. Thank you. Please register and attend. Share it with as many people as you can in your networks, in WILPF, at your church, at your school, where you work, all that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, George. George and Teresa Elmine have been working alongside our Membership Development Committee to help organize new branches in the South. We're so grateful to their help in enlarging WILPF Circle and making it more diverse. So thank you. Next up is Nancy Price on preparations for COP27 meeting in November in Egypt. Go ahead, Nancy.
Can you put up the text pad? Is that possible?
I can. Hold on.
That would be great. So I just wanted to say that we were reminded by Medea that we face an existential crisis with nuclear war and endless wars. We've been challenged by Charlotte to think about the existential crisis of the link between oil and gas and war or militarism and security and war. And I'd like to call your attention, because we're talking here about Earth democracy, that we're faced with a third existential crisis, with the fact that this decade is the decisive decade to stop the climate collapse and the sixth extinction of life on Earth. To this end, there's a new coalition that's been developing around the call for working together towards a people-led, bottom-up global Earth Assembly by 2023-2024 in response to the capture of the UN climate change COP meetings and biodiversity conference by governments and corporations that seek to continue doing business as usual to protect their power and their profits. I just want to bring that to your attention, because in the next e-news, I will be writing much more about the Earth assemblies and how we at the local level can organize around Earth assemblies with our branches and members. In addition to which, I want to call your attention that Saturday, November 12th, is going to be a global day of action for climate and environmental justice that will be falling toward the end of the Conference of Parties, the COP meeting number 27, being held in Sharm el-Sheikh. You could just scroll up a little bit there, Mary Beth. Sharm el-Sheikh, which is south of Cairo. It's a tourist seaside resort on the Red Sea. So a nice environment to be speaking about climate emergencies and corporate power and profit over the aspects of nature. I want to remind you that you can go to the recent e-news for October. The link is there, and you can read about Cindy Peister, who's going to represent WILPF US and the Earth Democracy Committee as one of 10 delegates to the Conference of Parties COP27. Cindy will be with the first group of 5 delegates with passes to the Blue Zone. The Blue Zone is where country delegations, diplomats, and delegates from NGOs and organizations meet and begin to debate a variety of policies. We hope that they will agree, probably not very likely, but we hope they will agree that all military greenhouse gases have to be accounted for, not just voluntarily, but mandated that they account for those, especially the heavily militarized countries. And we hope that they will agree on loss and damages fund that will help the countries of the global south and poor communities recover from the losses of climate catastrophe and the damages. That's one fund that's very important. It's not likely that the First Nations will agree to this. There's a lot of controversy about it because they are, of course, the largest emitters of greenhouse gases, whereas the global south doesn't emit much at all. So they're suffering from northern emissions. And second of all, the Green Climate Fund, which is has pledged $100 billion, but as Medea mentioned, only 10 billion has been pledged by some of the smaller countries, the Scandinavian countries and a few in the European Union, whereas the US and some of the other larger countries can really afford to. That is, of course, if we move the money from war to peace, we'd have much more money that could go into the Green Fund, as Medea also stressed. So look for your next November e-news that will come out November 1st for an explanation of the National November 12 Day of Action and also of Earth Assemblies. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Next up is Lenny Reeves, if she's still with us.
I'm still with you, and my name is Lenny Villagomez Reeves. Thanks.
I have it just like that on the text pad, Lenny.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I may have married a person named Reeves a long time ago, but I'm working really hard to get my name back. And I need your support in that. Okay, real quick. I have 2 quick action items for you where you just have to click on the link and sign. As you all know, Hurricane Ian hit Western Cuba as well as before it hit Florida. It did a lot of damage in Cuba, although Cuban evacuation policies that put, human life before property did limit the death toll to 2 people only. The US blockade makes it very difficult for Cuba to access materials and financing needed to rebuild and restore. So go ahead and sign this letter to Biden, asking Biden to relax the blockade to let Cuba rebuild after the hurricane. And here's another letter to Biden, so to speak. And it was nice that you had Medea on because this one comes through Code Pink. Cuba does not belong on the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. I'm sure we could all pick some countries like Saudi Arabia that would look real good on that list, but Cuba is not one of them. Trump put the Cuba back on this list right as his dirty butt was going out the White House door. Why hasn't Biden reversed this already? Go ahead and click on that one and sign the Code Pink petition also. Semi-last, on November 2nd and 3rd, the UN is going to vote on the blockade of Cuba. Again, they do this every year, and every year, all the countries in the world, including major US allies, vote against the blockade of Cuba. They vote that the blockade should be ended. Last time, essentially, it was only the US and Israel that voted in favor of the blockade, with a couple of countries abstaining. This vote, again, it's going to be on the 2nd and 3rd of November. There's a week of actions leading up to the vote. For more information, I've put in a website for you. And then for real last, we have our program of films made by Juana Maria Cordones Cook about Cuban women of the African diaspora. And we have it's on every Sunday evening at 5 p.m. if you're in the Pacific time zone, 7 if you're in the Central, 8 if you're on the East Coast, and of course 6 by Mountain Time. And our film this Sunday is going to be Georgina Herrera, Mujer Negra y Pobre. It's really terrific. She is a fascinating person. She's a great poet. And I'll throw that in the chat for you also. And I believe that's the only one that is not on the Google Docs. So all this info is It's there. Here you go. One
I
more
don't see
time.
I don't see the website for the UN votes on the on the
Oh,
blockade.
let me put that in again.
Okay. Video.
Copy, edit, paste. This
All
is
right,
nice chat because it allows long messages. Some of them cut you off at just a few. Why am I having trouble? Suddenly I can't get things to go into the chat. Before I could.
You should be able to. It's not. It's all.
Here we go.
Uh,
Maybe.
Here, use
There we
that.
go.
Okay.
It does have a length limit, as it turns
well, that
out.
could be it.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thank you, Lenny.
Most kind.
Personally, I have two short announcements. The Women, Money, and Democracy Committee held its second public banking learning circle in the spring, and we had a pretty exciting result. A cohort of 5 Vermont women who just happened by, fate to show up at the same learning circle have become so fired up about public banking in their state that they are leading statewide organizing efforts, reviving an initiative that had been dead in the water in Vermont. We are so proud of their efforts and hard work that I just wanted to brag a little about it. And finally, the always anticipated WILPF US Peace and Freedom magazine will be in your mailboxes soon. So soon after that, you'll receive our end of year appeal. We're asking you to invest in peace by supporting the work of your WILPF sisters with a generous donation. We know this has been a tough year for everyone, but keep in mind that those who donate to WILPF are among a very few generous donors. We don't have the kind of reach that so many charities do. So every gift, no matter the size, matters. This year, Teresa Elamine has pledged $100 to the end of year appeal and challenges everyone else to match her gift. I'm going to do it. Imagine how much we could extend our work if even a third of our members made that size commitment. Please consider a donation. It can make a huge difference. Put your money where your heart is and match Teresa's challenge. So stay on if you would like for our informal soapbox segment immediately following this call. That's where we hang out and share feedback from the call and more discussion and check in personally with one another. We're not sure if our next One WILPF call will be in January or February. We're working on it. Watch for our e-alert to confirm the date. It's always the third Thursday of the month. I'm sorry, the second Thursday of the month. So since we won't meet again like this until after the elections and after the holidays, stay on for the soapbox. But meanwhile, all the best to you, our sisters, and keep the faith and raise your voices for people and planet. Let's all unmute and say goodnight if you have to leave now. And if you can stay for the soapbox, that would be great.
Night.
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 Good night. Good night.
Good one.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Good night. Saving a chat.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you,
every day.
everyone. Thank you.
Night.
Stay if you can.
Okay. Let's see.
So do we want to keep the recording going, or shall we end the recording?
No, I think you could stop recording, Ellen. We're just gonna